crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Oil prices under a bit of pressure here this morning. You've got crude off at nearly 2%, one day after President Trump declared a national energy emergency and vowed to increase oil and gas production in the U.S. Joining us now, we want to bring in Andy Lipow. He's Lipow Oil Associates President. And Andy, it's great to see you. I want to start with some commentary, actually, that we got earlier this morning. I had a chance to speak with Stifel's Brian Gardner and asked him about President Trump's actions so far within the energy industry. Here's what he told me.
To use his phrase, it's drill, baby, drill. I guess the question is, and this is an open question, is it will, baby, will, in terms of are oil companies, energy companies going to do more exploration and production? I think there is a policy in place. It doesn't mean necessarily we're going to see massive new production exploration that are going to lead to a drop in oil prices.
And do you agree? I guess how willing do you see big oil being in terms of expanding their drilling operations?
Well, I do agree with those comments because the big oil producers are looking at the price of crude oil to determine whether they're going to invest or not. Certainly, the Trump administration easing regulations makes more acreage available to these producers, but they still have to decide whether there's going to be a financial reward for investing hundreds of millions of dollars in many cases, especially in the offshore Gulf of Mexico, as well as up in Alaska.
It's interesting given that the U.S. is already at peak oil production, though, and then we continue to hear Trump talking about drill, baby, drill. You can take a look at this chart here and see the U.S. outpacing Russia and Saudi Arabia in terms of oil production, and that's a trend that has been developing over the past decade or so. To what extent does more drilling necessitate decreased oil prices? Is that a given under this administration?
Well, not necessarily on the domestic side. It's expected that oil production will hit another record here in 2025. But I think that the oil market is actually looking at the Trump administration policies overseas. And in other words, what kind of sanctions are going to be continued on Russian oil exports, where India and China have been the biggest customers of Russia. Now they're seeking alternative supplies. What kind of impact are sanctions going to be on Iran? Is there going to be a more robust type of policy to limiting Iranian exports? And we're still receiving some oil, a couple 100,000 barrels a day of Venezuela. And is Trump going to impose sanctions on Venezuela that prevents that oil from reaching the U.S. markets? So all of these policies can impact total world oil supply and consequently the price.
So let's talk a little bit more then about pricing, because here we are today. You have crude off just about 2%. Lots of questions about whether or not we're going to remain range bound. Do the developments of yesterday, and maybe as we learn more from the Trump administration, how do you see that further pressuring prices? To what extent?
Well, I think the drill, baby, drill, as I mentioned, is really going to depend on the producers. But what I am concerned about is the imposition of 25% tariffs on Canada as well as Mexico. As you know, we import about 4 million barrels a day of oil from Canada, both throughout the Midwest, the Rocky Mountains, the East and West Coast. And certainly deliveries to the East and West Coast can be diverted elsewhere. We're also importing about 500,000 barrels a day from Mexico, all by tanker vessel, most of it into the Gulf Coast. That could be diverted elsewhere. And ultimately, the market is concerned that these tariffs will raise the price of gasoline and diesel for the consumer, which is directly opposite what the Trump administration would like.
Which do you think is more likely then? Will prices go up or down for consumers?
I think that it's likely that they will drift on up during the course of this year between the sanctions that the U.S. administration is going to impose on Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, combined with a general slow growth of oil demand around the world. I think we'll see higher prices as we go through this year. But like 2024, it was quite the bumpy ride.
It certainly was. We also saw Trump rolling back some executive orders under the Biden administration, including lifting a freeze on new liquefied natural gas permits. How do you think that impacts the energy market?
I think that's actually very good for U.S. energy production. We just in December brought on a new LNG export facility in Louisiana. There was an expansion down in Corpus Christi. There's a few more LNG facilities that are coming online in the next couple of years. But if we look at the next tranche of LNG investment, which takes years and years and years to come to fruition,